Sometimes think of trauma as like a wounding, like scar on your body. Or you have a scar in your heart, in your emotional world. So we think the scar is the problem. And we focus on the scar, the hurt, the trauma, the memory, all of that. But what about all the stuff around the scar? What about you that has never been harmed? So there's an aspect of us that even though we might have been harmed, even at a very early age, there's also a way in which, as I was saying earlier, there's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what's wrong with you. And if we start to focus on what's right, say starting with the body and with the breath and with awareness itself and the capacity to attend, then we can gradually shift things from being imprisoned by the trauma to having that be a scar that has shaped the way we see the world, but it hasn't destroyed us in the process. And I think that's the practice. That's the kind of way of being in wise relationship with the unwanted.
Pain all their lives due to a childhood injury, where a surgeon accidentally left a needle and thread inside the foot during surgery. In this case, isn't it more important to remove the needle, which is the cause of the pain, rather than just recognizing the pain itself through mindfulness meditation? Even when participating in retreats like Vipassana for 10 or 20 days, some practitioners continue their own harmful habits. Volunteers also show strong egos and cause discord. Such persistent habits can sometimes stem from trauma, core emotions, or beliefs. So isn't it necessary to explore one's unconsciousness deeper than just recognition?
Yes, totally. When one cultivates intimacy with the landscape of the mind, you see the causes and conditions that give rise to suffering. And the recognition has the potential to, on an absolute level, in no time, liberate those causes and conditions. But it doesn't always happen. Sometimes you need years of practicing, and you need psychotherapy, and you need to be with people who love you and who care about you. And sometimes it's hard to find those kinds of circumstances, and one feels lonely and depressed and isolated, as we were saying at the beginning. So it's not like we should think that mindfulness is the answer to all life's problems by any stretch of the imagination, or MBSR, but it's more like this is a place to kind of, if you think of it as like your whole organism is an instrument, like a violin, then the meditation practice is like tuning the instrument. You tune the instrument and then it plays well. So the more you tune it, you may have to tune it moment by moment by moment throughout the day because it's so stressful and so traumatic. And if you have a trauma history, yes, you're going to need effective trauma-sensitive mindfulness, not just mindfulness, but mindfulness teachers that understand trauma. And also psychotherapists who are specialists in trauma. Now, there's a way in which all of us have trauma. We have, sometimes it's called little t trauma. And then some people have big T trauma, much more horrific. But that's not an impediment to healing. I sometimes think of trauma as like a wounding, like scar on your body. Or you have a scar in your heart, in your emotional world. So we think the scar is the problem. And we focus on the scar, the hurt, the trauma, the memory, all of that. But what about all the stuff around the scar? What about you that has never been harmed? So there's an aspect of us that even though we might have been harmed, even at a very early age, there's also a way in which, as I was saying earlier, there's more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what's wrong with you. And if we start to focus on what's right, say starting with the body and with the breath and with awareness itself and the capacity to attend, then we can gradually shift things from being imprisoned by the trauma to having that be a scar that has shaped the way we see the world, but it hasn't destroyed us in the process. And I think that's the practice. That's the kind of way of being in wise relationship with the unwanted. We all have unwanted aspects of life unfold every day, you know, and how we work with them is part of the love affair of mindfulness. And it affects other people too. So the more that we can be kind and empathic with ourselves, the more we can actually embrace other people with kindness and compassion and empathy when they are suffering, and not make ourselves the center of the world, and also build stories that say, I'm never going to be okay, when actually you're already okay.
This is a real case in Korea. And a sincere Christian professor wounded his foot when
left a needle in the foot.
Yeah.
Well, of course it should be removed. You know?
He read Bible, only Bible. I have to understand the meaning of God.
Because God left the needle in my foot.
Yeah.
No, you take out the needle. Well, you know, there's a famous joke about that. You know that in the U.S. I don't know if it's appropriate to tell it, but it's like this person, if I remember the joke correctly, this person was very devoted to God, and you know, just prayed to God all the time, and God would take care of me. God will take care of me. God will take care of me. And then one day there was a gigantic hurricane. So rained and rained and rained, and all the rivers overflowed, and there was like vast wind and so forth. And the water started to rise up in her house, and it got to the first floor, and then it got to the second floor, and she's like on the roof, and a boat comes by on one day and says, get into the boat. And she says, no, I'm okay, God will take care of me. And the next day, a bigger boat comes by, get into the boat. And then finally, she's on the roof of the house, and a helicopter comes and says, here, climb up this ladder into the helicopter and be rescued. And she says, no, God will take care of me. And then, of course, she drowns, and she dies, and she goes to heaven. And she says, God, you completely let me down. I've been, you know, worshiping you my entire life. And then, you know, you sent this hurricane and I died. And God replies, well, I did send 2 boats and a helicopter.
Korea has made a remarkable progress from undeveloped to advanced in a short time. But in the process, the suicide rate is the highest.
Is this true?
Yeah. True. Due to a lot of stress, fatigue syndrome, frustration, and wounds, and many people suffer from depression. What kind of help do you think mindfulness meditation can offer to Koreans facing such challenges?
If what you're saying is true, first of all, I'm just very saddened to hear that. That's horrible. I mean, it's really horrible. And that there's so much despair among young people, and so much anxiety and depression and so forth. At a moment when Korean society is very prosperous in many ways. So then there's a question of like the emptiness of that, you know, the emptiness of material success. And then you've got all these Korean pop bands and everything. I mean, tremendous, like worldwide notoriety and commercial success, right? But is it all based on unhappiness and depression? Or is there, so this is kind of like, I can't possibly answer that question, but maybe Korean society needs to ask that question like a Zen koan. what is this trying to tell us? What do we need to do as a society to save our children? And I don't know what the answer would be, but you know, you do have thousands of years of history, of Dharma history. Maybe there's, you know, it's time for wisdom and compassion and governing to come together in such a way that you address those endemic problems in your society. We in the United States have our own problems, and they're not that different from what you're saying. Only this sounds like it's, you know, a particular kind of epidemic, and if the suicide rate is that high. Now, you know, it's getting worse in the United States too, because, well, you know, almost everybody in this room is holding a phone, you know, and we're looking at the phone all the time. It's like people walk around in the world, and I have mine in my jacket, but, you know, it's like we're entering a world where the digital is taking over from the analog. And this is not a prescription for happiness. You can't find happiness in your phone. You can find distraction. So it's anti-meditation, it's anti-mindfulness. Even though I have a mindfulness app, you know, I mean, JKZ Meditations is like, I have my own app for doing meditation. And I meet with people actually online in real time. We have live sessions on the app. But still, we need more than the digital devices. We need to connect with our analog beauty. And our analog beauty is much older than the digital magic. We are the result of 13.8 billion years of evolution. And we are inside our head is right under the skull is the most complex arrangement of matter in the known universe. So for us to be depressed or anxious is insane. It's crazy. We are such beautiful creatures. But we have to create a society that honors the beauty. From birth, you know, from babies, you know, like babies are all born Buddhas, right? I mean, it's just like nothing cuter in the whole world, nothing more beautiful than a baby. And if the baby turns into a teenager and then is like alienated and depressed, okay, sometimes that's just part of being a teenager, but they have to have a society where they feel there's a place for them. And when you have a society where you don't feel that there's like hope and a place for me when I grow up, then things become meaningless, and then you can very easily, you know, dive into dark spaces, deep depression, and then the analog stuff, especially social media, compounds that terribly and puts you in these little echo chambers where you just hear one untruth after another untruth after another untruth, and it's all meant to keep you focused on the phone. They don't care about you at all. They just care about, are your eyeballs on this site? And we need to learn how to combat that, how to honor our analog beauty. And that's where the meditation practice, if it's taught correctly, if it's taught like blah, 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 nobody would be interested. But if it's taught correctly, then befriending yourself becomes the most interesting thing in the world. And it gives rise to all sorts of, don't know mind gives rise to many, many possibilities. And then you find the one that's in some sense karmically related to you. And then your life becomes like poetry, beauty, love. And that's the real meditation practice. It's a love affair with the nature of reality. But the nature of reality is not depression or anxiety. That's a wrong view. But it's the cause of a great deal of outer harm. and non-recognition. So we don't see each other's beauty. And this is a big problem for society in this country, and I'm sure in Korea and everywhere else too. So that's where a lot of healing has to happen.
Some argue that meditation encourages individuals to focus too much on their own problems and themselves in order to be happy. It is important to try to be kind in relationship with others, but focus on one's inner thoughts may keep them isolated. What are your thoughts on this?
There's no separation between self and other. So there's no separation between anything, and the challenge is to be as inclusive as possible. Mindfulness is not about focusing on your inner thoughts. It's about recognizing your inner thoughts, because when you focus on them, you're just going to think more and more and more, and that's going to give you a big headache, and create problems. But when you don't take your thoughts personally, when you see them as events in the field of awareness, but their nature is impersonal, but they build a big story of me and my success, or me and my failure, or me and my whatever. You realize that that's empty of any kind of essential validity. It's just generating narratives. And so your awareness is bigger than the narrative. And so, of course, I'm me and you're you, and we know that, and that we live in a conventional world. But when we bring awareness to that conventional world, it adds what I sometimes call an orthogonal dimension to living. It's a kind of hidden dimension. It's here all the time, but when you inhabit awareness as what the neuroscience would call your default mode, then you don't necessarily fall into these kind of emotion-laden stories that lead to anxiety, that lead to depression, that lead to anger, that lead to taking everything personally. And that's as much a part of the meditation practice as sitting and watching your breath, because it's just a different door into the same awareness. And that awareness is illuminating. It affords insight, and you see how much we generate the causes of our own suffering, and then we take everything personally, and we center everything around I, me, and mine. And so when we start to investigate the personal pronouns, especially I, me, and mine, begin to realize that, again, coming back, like, who am I? I don't know. Okay, that's fine. So awareness of not knowing, rather than the story of me, starring me, and what a great success I am, or what a great failure I am, or how depressed I am, or how anxious I am. When you can investigate, like, is my awareness of my anxiety anxious? And you find, no, it's not. Is my awareness of my depression depressed? No, it's not. So this is a new degree of freedom, a hidden dimension that you can actually learn to inhabit if you practice, if you exercise the muscle. That's what mindfulness is actually doing. And that's why people say, as I told you about the patients who wrote me notes or catch me in the airport or on an airplane, they say, you gave my life back to me. It's not really true. I didn't give them anything. They gave their own life back to them by seeing how much they fall into traps around I, me, and mine, and then not falling into those traps so readily. And it's a lifetime's engagement. And as I say, one shouldn't think of it as one more hard thing that I have to do in my everyday life. It's a love affair, and washing the dishes is mindful. Is a meditation practice. Making love is a meditation practice. Taking your children to school is a meditation practice. Singing in a rock band is a meditation practice. There's dancing is a meditation. There's nothing that's not a meditation practice if you're willing to show up fully embodied. And then I'll say one more thing, and that is, because there's so much propaganda around enlightenment with meditation practice. Everybody thinks, well, okay, meditation's okay, but I have to get enlightened. Sung San actually wrote a book called Wanting Enlightenment is a Big Mistake. And I sometimes say, you know, maybe we should give up the idea that, because no one knows what enlightenment is, but everybody wants it. Everybody thinks, oh, if only I was enlightened. But they have no idea what it is. So that's a kind of, it's insane. It's an insane fantasy. But how about if we switch things around for a moment and we say, whoever you think is enlightened, even the Dalai Lama or whoever, maybe that's like just another story. If you ask the Dalai Lama, are you enlightened? He would laugh. He would just laugh. And he certainly wouldn't answer, because if you say, yes, I'm enlightened, it's proof that you're not enlightened, okay, whatever enlightenment means. But what I suggest is that maybe we give up thinking about people being enlightened. Maybe there are no enlightened people. Maybe there are only enlightening moments. And they're available to everybody. And the more enlightening moments you have, the more you're actually engaged in the only life that's possible, which is this life in this moment. Everything else, the past and the future, it's just a fiction. And this moment, when you're fully awake, that is a moment of, that's an enlightening moment, because you see more deeply into this orthogonal dimension of reality. And orthogonal, it comes from quantum physics and geometry, and it just means at right angles to coordinates, other coordinates. So it's a hidden dimension. You know, mathematicians can have an n-dimensional space, not just 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional, 5-dimensional, 6-dimensional, n-dimensional. And they need that for string theory and for, you know, sort of quantum physics. And they think that maybe, you know, the reality, you know, sort of matter is kind of maybe exists in a kind of 11-dimensional space or something like that. We can't possibly understand that. But the fact is that that maybe the most important dimension has been here all along, and it's awareness. And when you inhabit it, everything else changes. It's the same, so the same as it was a moment before, but it's also different because you're here for it without being imprisoned by the story of me.